Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Richard Jones. If I had any qualifications to deliver this talk, I suppose they are that I was a music editor at the Bristol Evening Post from 87 to about 92, and I've also published as tangent books various titles exploring Bristol street art, music and counterculture and politics in general. So almost by definition of what I'm going to talk about, there are very few records because this counterculture was very, very deeply buried, so it very, very rarely found its any expression in certainly the mainstream media, but apart from some of the stuff that I wrote, but also Venue magazine would occasionally touch on it, but it was it was several strata beneath that. Also, I'm not going to talk much about punk, and the reason for that is that, one, I don't have the time, and two, it's a different path. It's not to deny the huge influence of punk in any way, but I think that's a different discussion. So, having said that, let's start with a bit of punk. Right, the Cortinas, generally regarded as being Bristol's first punk band, certainly most successful, one of the few to have a single released as early as 1976, although the Pigs and Social Security would maybe disagree with that. They were very, very hot on the heels. The second wave of punk is perhaps better known with the bands like Chaos UK and Vice Squad. But let's go back a bit from 1976. Let's rewind a bit to the late 50s, early 60s, when Bristol, like any other city in the UK, skiffle was developing into rock and roll. And Bristol was much the same as any other city in that respect. It also boasted a person called Russ Conway, real name Trevor Herbert Stanford. Now, Russ Conway had 2 number ones and 6 piano pieces in the top 10, and a total of 20 instrumental pieces in the top 20 between 1957 and 1963. He's arguably Bristol's greatest ever musical entertainer. Seriously, he was a remarkable character as well. He was sent to Boston as a teenager, had a really strange relationship with his mother, who once dressed him in a dress to go to Broadmead and go on a bus to Broadmead because he didn't have any other clothes. He had to wear his sister's dresses, so he was an interesting character, Russ. Suffered from terrible nerves later in life, as you might imagine. So some of the other bands, the rock and roll bands at the time, achieved some minor success. And I should mention as well Roger Cook and Roger Greenaway, who from Fishponds, who played in a band called the Eagles, among others, being the Bristol Eagles, were based at Eagle House, the community centre in Knowle West, rather than the Hotel California Eagles. They're probably two of the most successful songwriters in the history of modern music. A whole string of hits in the 70s. I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing was probably their best known. At one point, they had they'd written 3 of the top 4 songs in the charts. They had number 1, 3, and 4. The only thing which prevented them having a straight run of 1, 2, 3, which has not been achieved before or since, was Benny Hill. With Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West. They're still alive, and they're in Nashville now, and very, very pretty much unknown, I'd say, but two of the most successful, the 2 most successful songwriting partnerships, probably in modern music and certainly in terms of Bristol, from Fishponds. But the point being that we have these success stories from Bristol in the 60s, as with any other city, not to the extent of Liverpool, obviously. But then something happened in the late 60s where Bristol music just went underground. And nobody really knows why that is the case. I would suggest that there are possibly 2 reasons. The one being that Bristol's proximity to London is that London expected Bristol to dance to the London tune, and so wouldn't allow a regional scene to happen that close to London, whereas Liverpool, Sheffield, Manchester, Glasgow, etc., they were far enough away not to fall under the influence of London. The other one I would suggest, is the demise of inner city industry in Bristol, particularly the city docks, which actually closed in 1975. But by the late 60s, we're in rapid decline. So Bristol lost its working class inner city industry. There was nothing else in Bristol which employed large numbers of working class, largely men, but not exclusively men, obviously. So I think there were 2 things going on there. But nobody really knows why Bristol music ceased to make an impact nationally. So the Bristol music didn't really feature in the charts at all at this time. And it's interesting to note that that Bristol, if you accept that maybe 2 of the greatest expressions of largely male working class culture are music and football, Bristol also has never had a top-flight football team for any sustained length of time. So it's odd that this city should not have participated for so long in these expressions of then largely white male working class culture. Fred Wedlock had the oldest swinger in town, reached the top 10 in about 1976. The next chart success by any Bristol band, I'm not counting Bananarama, because 2 of them were from Bristol, but they didn't really trade on the fact that they were from Colpit Heath and Frampton Cotterell area, was Fresh Four. Fresh Four from Knowle West had a top 10 hit with Wishing on a Star, produced by Smith and Mighty. And so you had from pretty much Fred Wedlock to Fresh Four no real representation of Bristol in the mainstream national charts. Bristol was represented in the charts. It would be by the likes of Fred Wedlock and Adge Cutler and the Wurzels. And so there's this very, very much a yokel image of what was coming out of Bristol and the West Country. It wasn't cool in the slightest, in terms of music. You also never heard a Bristol accent on national television or radio. We really were country bumpkins. Also, we were portrayed as such. Obviously, there was stuff going on in Bristol which was really dynamic and interesting, exciting and radical, but it never really, in terms of music, it never really made it out of the city. Some of the musicians did, because they found they had to move to Bristol, from Bristol largely to London, in order to further their careers. So then in the late 70s, something happened. And one of the main movers in this is, so 10 years after really, this sort of very fallow period in the started in the 60s. And one of the main exponents of that was obviously the Cortinas, although they didn't have any chart success. They released one album on I think EMI, which wasn't that great. I think they would readily admit it was toned down a bit, and so Bristol continued not to have a great deal of success. Then came the pop group, and one of the most influential people in the history of Bristol music, modern history of Bristol music, is Mark Stewart. Mark sadly died almost 2 years to the day, actually, today. So I think it was his anniversary of his death was last weekend. So Mark was tremendously influential. He founded the pop group. There was a lot of crossover between the members of the pop group and the Cortinas through Bristol Grammar School largely, and Cotton Grammar School. The pop group failed to have any great commercial success, but they were tremendously influential. They were taken under the wing of Patti Smith, toured with them. Nick Cave saw them when he first came over to the UK with the Bad Seeds and said they had made a huge impact. Let's have a little bit of the pop group. So the pop group, they avant-garde, very heavy dub, funk influences, a lot of noise, became very experimental with their instruments. They by their own admission, started to disrespect their instruments and just make an unholy noise, which at times they became unlistenable. Not surprisingly, they crashed and burned after about 2 years. I think it was 1981 they split up, and they were around from about 1978, 79. But Mark had a huge impact on the Bristol scene for various reasons. One, he helped out a lot of other musicians and bands, but also when the pop group were at their peak, they got picked up very early on, got the Patti Smith tour, I think it was the Easter tour, and then they were taken to New York by their record label, and where they were Flavour of the Month. And but Mark, being the character he was, he got bored with hanging out with, being entertained in swish hotels in downtown Manhattan, and he heard something about the block parties going on the other side of town in the Bronx. So he walked across Manhattan one night and went to a WBML Zulu Nation block party. Spent the night there, to the astonishment of the people who'd taken him over, who said it was far too dangerous to walk across Manhattan that time of night. But what he did was he brought back with him some really raw hip-hop mixtapes of Africa Bambaataa, Zulu Nation, which had not been heard in the UK before. So this was completely new and a completely new style of music. Mark brought them back to Bristol, and and they found their way into the hands of the Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch were interesting. DJ Milo now describes Wild Bunch as a music and art collective. At the time, it was a hip hop crew, essentially, and Wild Bunch, of course, morphed into Massive Attack. So to put the Wild Bunch in context, they were very much from the this hip hop scene in the mid '80s in Bristol, across the country, but particularly Bristol, and particularly because these mixtapes had come back from New York and had a massive influence. So sorry. Yeah, so it's really easy to chart the rise of of Massive Attack and onto Banksy from the Cortinas to the pop group, Wild Bunch, Massive Attack, Portishead, Tricky, which is the established narrative. But I think that ignores a lot of things. Clearly, there were significant events during that. One being the 1985 graffiti art exhibition at Arnold Feeney, which was curated by 3D, Robert Del Naja from Massive Attack, and then Wild Bunch. But also I think there were four very significant things which were peculiar to Bristol, the Bristol area at this time. One was the St Paul's Uprising of 1980. The second was the festival scene around Bristol and the West Country at that time. And I'd include the Dugout Club as part of that cultural scene, if you like. The third is the Battle of the Beanfield. It's the 40th anniversary on June the 1st this year, so that was in 1985. And the fourth is graffiti, the whole graffiti scene. So those are the four things which I would say were particular to Bristol around this time. So looking at the St Paul's Uprising, it was following the uprising, which started on April the 2nd, 1980, the police backed off from St Paul's. The uprising was largely, if not entirely, provoked by heavy-handed policing. And after the uprising, they backed off, some say through negotiation with the community, who certainly had the upper hand during the uprising. Broadby, just over the road from St Paul's, I think there was a fear that Broadby could have gone up in flames. So there was some sort of negotiation, and that allowed or enabled crews like Wild Bunch and some of the other early hip hop crews, such as Too Bad, City Rockers, Defcon, and FBI, to hold their house parties, which were illegal gatherings. Where typically an empty building would be broken into. Some of the Rastafarians might be running the weed concession. Someone else would have the red stripe concession, and the sound systems we borrowed from some of the older sound systems in St Paul's, and they were allowed to go ahead without being undisturbed largely by the police. And I would suggest that's as a result of the St Paul's Uprising. Festivals. For a period in the Bristol area, you had four major festivals on our doorstep. We had Glastonbury, Ashton Court Free Festival, WOMAD, which for the first 2 years was very local to Bristol, and St Paul's Carnival. So you had the national acts at Glastonbury. You had the Ashton Court Festival as a centre for the local scene. WOMAD bringing this world music influence, which was pretty much unheard at the time, and then the dub culture, which then underpinned St Paul's. So the aspiring crews at this time would have been influenced, no doubt, by all of this. And you could get into them for free. Ashton Court was free. If you couldn't get into Glastonbury for free in those days, you weren't worth your salt. And a lot of them were run out of Bristol as well. And of course St Paul's was free as well. The Dugout Club, briefly, there's a whole history of the Dugout Club, but the Dugout Club on Park Row was has a long history as a meeting place for musical creatives in Bristol. It goes all the way back to the early 60s when it was largely a jazz club. In fact, the brilliant avant-garde jazz musician Keith Tippett played one of his first gigs there. He left his brass band, which is his preferred, well, which was what he was playing at the time, and discovered jazz, and apparently that was one of his first gigs. Also, the dugout, the iconic dugout sign was created by a guy called Terry Brace, who was part of a collective called Plastic Dog in the late 60s, about 68 to 76, something like that. And they were promoters. They were sort of artists and musicians who promoted at the Dugout and the Granary Club. And interestingly, Terry Brace, who sadly is no longer with us, ended up as an art teacher at Filton, what was then Filton Tech. And among two of his pupils were Tom Bingle, the street artist, Inky, and Felix, who were two of the very early street artists. So you can see these connections skip generations, or one generation influence, if unknowingly, by the next, because they had no idea that Terry Brace had designed the dugout logo. So the Battle of the Beanfield is the third, I think, major event. I'm just going to read you a very short piece from Dale Vince's book. Dale Vince from Ecotricity and the owner of Forest Green Rovers, his book Manifesto. Dale Vince was there travelling with the convoy in 1980. The cops came in with a simple plan: violence. It was the same cops with the same plan that had trashed the miners under orders from Thatcher. Now they were coming for our convoy and the whole counterculture stroke New Age traveller movement. They faced off against us, a tribe of barefoot, unarmed men, women and children, and made no distinction. We were the enemy to them. They came in to break us, to break our homes and our way of life. The Battle of the Beanfield took place in Wiltshire. The convoy was travelling to Stonehenge for the Summer Solstice Festival, and the reason it's called the Battle of the Beanfield is the convoy was forced off the roads into a beanfield where the police brutally set about them. So as a result of that, some of the convoy regrouped and carried on travelling. Others they'd been pointed out to them that they could expect a bit more of this from the police and these were police who'd been in conflict with the miners, until as recently as a few months before, and so some of them regrouped in the cities, Bristol being the nearest city, and so some of the travellers, the convoy, parked up around St Paul's and Montpellier particularly, and they were embraced by the free party scene, the hip-hop scene, which was developing at that time, and so you had the illegal free party scene going on, very, very underground. You had the travellers then bringing their brand of anarchy and music and particular circus skills to this party scene. One of the reasons why Bristol is now an internationally recognised centre for circus skills, with Circomedia particularly, is because of this heritage of the convoy bringing that sort of those skills into the inner city. So the graffiti is the fourth element I was going to talk about just briefly. So any hip-hop crew worth their salt would abide to or would embrace the 5 pillars of hip-hop. So number 1, MCing. Number 2, DJing. Number 3, breakdancing. Number 4, knowledge, which is political self-awareness, or learning life lessons through the medium of hip-hop and the message of the music. And the fourth one, the essential one, is graffiti. So all these crews would have to abide, well, if they were to be taken really seriously on the New York model, would abide by them. So clearly the history of Bristol graffiti is a whole other story. But what tended to happen then is that some of the writers, the graffiti artists known as writers, they did the flyers for the free parties. So particularly Crime Inc., the crew Crime Inc., Chaos from Noel West, and 3D, Robert Del Naja, were instrumental in producing the flyers which were distributed to tell kids about where the free parties were taking place. 3D also rapped with the Wild Bunch at the time. Let's have a little bit of Wild Bunch, as I've just mentioned them. So this is Friends and Countrymen, It's the first Wild Bunch single, and it's important as one of the beginnings of the Bristol sound. As you'll hear in a minute, they slow things down. There was an obsession. There's an obsession with beats per minute was starting now. Right, so you can see already, that the involvement from punk to this very, very New York-inspired hip-hop, and particularly this slower version of hip-hop, which Milo from the Wild Bunch in particular was, he had the idea, the crazy idea, so hey, what happens if we slow things down, as opposed to going faster and faster. And I think you clearly see that in the work of Massive Attack, Portishead and Trippy, what's become known as the Bristol sound, or trip-hop, that kind of more lazy beats. Two people who should be mentioned are Rob Smith and Ray Mighty. Rob from Lockleys, Ray from St Paul's. Ray was, I don't know if Rob was, but Ray was most certainly at the St Paul's uprising and very much influenced by it. They created a crew called Three Stripe, who were largely seen as more likely to make it than Wild Bunch stroke Massive Attack. They really were hot property. They signed a record deal to London Records, did an album called Bass's Maternal, which very few people have heard because it was never released. It had, I've heard some of it, and it had these it was a very dreamy soundscape with sort of gaps between the music. London Records told us if they could fill in the gaps with some beats, which they refused to do, and they spent 4 years under contract not being able to work. There is a version of it which has been released, but I don't think the original recording has been heard very much at all. They produced a single with the nascent Massive Attack. This is the first time we see Massive Attack in print in music terms. They're mentioned. In fact, they were mentioned in Friends and Countrymen in one of the rap lyrics. So this is something which Ray and Rob and Ray did with Grant from Massive Attack and a guy called Carlton, who's kind of no longer really part of that scene, although I think he was an amazing vocalist, and his Cool With Nature album, I think, is one of the lost Bristol classics. So these, both Wild Bunch and this are 1988, and I would make the case that these are the two records, if you were going to identify the start of what's become known as a Bristol sound or hip-hop. These are these are
I'm gonna drop on down with a bit of light.
I know you're gonna dig this.
You go out every night as a single, but you don't really know what to do. You see someone you just like to mingle, and imagine that she is waiting for you. And you know that you feel is for real anytime.
So the graffiti connection through Robert Del Naja, 3D, Wild Bunch, Massive Attack. I think you can make a case for Robert Del Naja as being culturally the most important single figure in modern Bristol history. The reason being is he spans both the art and the music side of things. Son of a Italian father and British mother. His father was from Naples. He was a punk as a teenager and a die-hard Clash fan. And he was partly inspired to go towards art and hip-hop through the This Is Radio Clash video, which featured the New York writer Futura 2000. And I'll just quote you a couple of lines from Felix Braun's book, Children of the Can, which is a history of Bristol graffiti. When punk started to lose its impact, says Del Naja, when punk started to lose its impact on people, when it became the norm, suddenly hip-hop had the power. He painted his first piece in Hotwells in about 1983, and he was the first writer in Bristol. People like Zed, Boise and Dark followed hot on his heels. He was prolific as well. And he says, again in Children of the Can, he says, I used to take my paint with me to the dugout, put it in my DJ box, and I'd leave the club pretty much pissed and go out and hit a site. So this was a culture at the time, dugout being the centre for the hip-hop and certainly the burgeoning street art scene. He'd been arrested for a couple of times for criminal damage within a few years, hence the reason why 40 years ago, in 1985, he curated the Arnolfini show, which was a massive thing in terms of the establishing Bristol as a centre for street art. It brought in some New York writers, some Bristol writers. I believe that it was one of the most successful shows in terms of numbers in Arnolfini's history, and it certainly brought in a demographic which hadn't of school kids and people and more working class kids, I guess, who had adopted the hip hop and graffiti lifestyle, if you want. Barton Hill was clearly very important at this time as well. John Nation, a youth worker at Barton Hill, set up a project there, which became a centre for the next generation of writers. 3D had decided that he didn't want to go to prison, so he concentrated on Wild Bunch, and then the next generation of writers, people like Jody, Felix, Inky, Chio, they were nurtured at Barton Hill. Barton Hill is also important as is where Nellie Hooper from Wild Bunch came from, and one of the figures is often overlooked. Gary Clayle was also from Barton Hill. Gary specialised in this really heavy kind of dub rapping styles. It's great stuff. I haven't got time to play you any, but if you want to check it out, a lot of it is on New Sounds, Adrian Sherwood's label, where interestingly Mark Stewart pitched up after the pop group. Mark Stewart and the Mafia was a label mate of Gary Clare, along with people like, I don't know, Lee Scratch Perry was there, and African Head Charge and many others. Great label, still going strong today. So again, we can see that there's this kind of council estate influence here. Barton Hill, certainly Knoll West, that's where Fresh Fall were from, and also some of the Three Stripes group, particularly Chrissy Chris from Southmead. But because of the geography of Bristol, they were all able to walk to St Paul's. You know, Bristol was a small enough city that the kids could congregate there. Not a great deal of the artists lived in St Paul's. It's an interesting thing. It was still largely dominated by the reggae scene and the sound system scene. Ray Mighty being one of the exceptions to that. So, how am I doing for time? Okay, so we're going to get to Banksy in a minute, but very briefly. So, Del Naja had a massive impact as a writer, as a graffiti writer, and the line to Banksy is very, very clear. When Banksy first started writing, he claims he was influenced by Barton Hill. John Nation is very diplomatic about whether or not Banksy was there or not. He would have been very young if he was there. He'd have been 10 years old, so he could have been there. He certainly wasn't one of that generation. He's the next generation. But in Banksy's Bristol, he says well, actually, funnily enough, when I was about 10 years old, a kid called 3D was painting the streets hard. At the time doesn't work. He probably was much younger when 3D was in his prime. I grew up seeing spray painting on the streets way before I ever saw it in a magazine or on a computer. So you can see there's this direct link going back from the Cortinas, Mark Stewart, through the party scene, the festival scene, etc., which leads directly to Banksy. Now, we don't, of course, know. I mean, I don't know if anyone in this room knows Banksy. I mean, he clearly was on the radical fringes of Bristol politics through the Eastern Cowboys, particularly. So we don't know to what extent he was actually influenced by or aware of this history. But it's perhaps convenient that one of his lesser-known pieces, we'll just go through some 3D stuff. This is very early stuff. Oops. No Great Crime, down what used to be the Tropic Club. This is 3D and Mushroom in a hip-hop pose. And here we have Banksy, a little-known piece, really, from 2009, but it's a Battle of the Beanfield, is the title of this. So either obviously or subliminally, then Banksy recognises at least some of this tradition to which I would argue he is part of. Right, shall we finish with a bit of an oddity, actually. This is a video of a Massive Attack 2, which as far as I know has never been released. You can find it on YouTube easy enough. And I won't play it all because it's quite long. So this was released in 1991, produced by a guy called Roger Pomfrey, known as Dodge. He played in a Bristol band in the 70s called Looney Tunes, and Roger sadly died about 10 years ago, only aged 60. He did about 400 short films, a brilliant filmmaker. But in a way, he's particularly interesting because he was one of that generation who left Bristol to go to London to further his career because Bristol simply was not recognised as having any cultural or popular cultural worth at all. He ended up playing for Eurythmics and was also very much part of the West London, Portobello Road, Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill scene, based around a pub called the Warwick Castle. There's a whole other story about the Warwick Castle, but there's a very strong Bristol connection between the Warwick Castle. It's where a lot of the Bristol punk and hip-hop kids hung out when they went to London. And Warwick Castle's regulars included Naina Cherry, The Clash, Joe Strummer, Shane McGowan, and it maybe isn't a coincidence that Nick Sheppard replaced, from the Cortinas, replaced Mick Jones in The Clash, possibly through that connection. I don't know, he's a brilliant guitarist in his own right. So we'll just have a bit of this, and if we've got time, I'll be guided as to whether we do have any time for questions. So, Massive Attack, just a matter of time. Thank you very much. I should just say that you might have noticed they call each other Jack in that. Right, Jack? It's Jack calling Jack. And so, which Wild Bunch always did. And I only discovered this, no one really knew why. Well, some people did, obviously. But it's only when I published Milo Johnson's book last year. Milo Johnson was a member of the Wild Bunch who spent 3 years in Swansea Nick for allegedly stabbing a kid. He ran with Bristol City for stabbing a Rovers supporter in the Queen's Head opposite Eastfield Park. He didn't do it. He'd done lots of other bad things, but he didn't particularly do that. So he was in Swansea Nick. Swansea people are known as Jacks, and it was common parlance for prisoners to call each other Jack in Swansea Nick. So it's kind of a tribute to Milo. Thank you very much.